The Hour with Con Sweeney. It's also our first anniversary. 1 year ago, on the evening of July 20th, we had our first broadcast, and we are still broadcasting. But before I begin this evening, I'd like to be serious for a moment and remember someone whose second life lost since our last broadcast and who meant a lot to everyone who's in the world. I'm talking about Ebbe Altberg, who is the CEO of Linden Lab, the company that owns Second Life, who passed at the far too young age of 57. Ebbe took that position in February 2014 and had a major positive impact on the company and its operations. Coming off a very successful career in the tech sector, he endeared himself to his staff and the members of the Second Life community, myself included. Ebbe will be sorely missed, and I ask all of you to remember him and his family and friends. Now, what we're about tonight. We're a monthly show based here in Second Life. We broadcast live from here on Facebook and YouTube every third Monday of the month at 6 o'clock Second Life time or Pacific time for you folks in real life. We meet mystery authors and others in the publishing world to talk about books and the issues facing them today, from social and technological change. And there's certainly been a lot of that lately. I'd like to thank Drax Dupre, host of the Second Life Book Club and the Drax Files Radio Hour, both broadcasts from Second Life, for his sponsorship and the use of Book Club Island when we were there. I'd like to thank Strawberry Linden and Brett Linden for their help in setting the show up. And finally, my eternal thanks to Becky Hansen and Isabel Charon for their technical assistance in making this happen. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. And special thanks to Isabel for getting up at 1 o'clock her time to run the camera, although I understand her cat has something to do with her getting up this morning. Now, our regular viewers may notice that we're no longer on Book Club Island. The reason being that there's a lot going on over there these days, and setting up for our show was becoming a bit of an effort, so we decided to set up our own studio. More about this in our future broadcast. Now, allow me to introduce this evening's guest, Jane Kelly, author of the popular Meg Daniels series of mysteries set on the Jersey Shore here in the States. Full disclosure, Jane sits with me on the board of directors of the Mystery Writers of America's New York chapter, and despite that, she still agreed to be on tonight's broadcast. Welcome, Jane. How does it feel to be in Second Life?
Well, it feels pretty natural right now, which is good. I was a little worried, but I'm settled in and feeling good. And let me first say happy anniversary to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jane? I mean, I've known you for about 4 or 5 years now. You've got quite a background. You've lived and worked all over the world, haven't you?
Not all over, not as much as I like, but in a lot of places, yes. I grew up in Philadelphia, and all I ever really wanted to do was travel. So, of course, I went to library school when I got out of college, and I said, I don't know what I thought. Maybe they let me drive the bookmobile. I had no idea why I did that, but I went. I mean, I love libraries, but it wasn't going to get me, I thought, the travel I wanted. But as it turned out, it did, because I ended up working for companies that developed and marketed and trained on products for libraries. So I got to go pretty much around the world to do some training. And that kind of led me into doing a whole lot of reading, because I spent a lot of time on planes. And so there was, even though I didn't come to writing in a traditional way, I did get there via doing a whole lot of reading. And I love that kind of job. Some days I'd work half a day and then get on a plane and read for 5 hours. And that suited me just fine. I like that a lot. So that's how I got started.
I can relate to that, Jane. You know, once upon a time in a prior life, I used to spend a lot of time flying around the world, places like, Singapore and Tokyo, and I cannot sleep on airplanes. I can fall asleep anyplace else, my boss's meetings, buses. Be careful, I might slip off in this show. But on airplanes, for whatever reason, I just can't sleep. So I would spend the entire trip reading books, which I started looking forward to the trips because I could get in maybe 30 hours of reading easily in a week. But yeah, I know that. What attracted you to the Jersey Shore and writing the mysteries there? That's a big leap from reading in an airplane and suddenly deciding to write a book.
Well, actually, I'll back up and tell you how I first got started writing, and then how I ended up at the Jersey Shore. I really don't know what made me decide to write a book in the first place. I worked in, except all the reading, I guess, but I worked in online information, and there was online information before the internet, and it was really changing drastically. So I was in a profession that was changing, and so I began to look around at other things that I could do that would be interesting to me, and writing was one of them. And so I wrote a book. And I should say one other thing, and a lot of people do this. I wrote a mystery because I wanted to kill somebody. And I don't think that's particularly unusual. I think a lot of mystery writers get started when they want to kill someone. So it was part therapy, part career change. But I wrote a book where I killed my boss. And I was living in Connecticut at the time. So the book was set in Connecticut. And I was very, very lucky. I got the first agent I sent it to, responded. He loved it. He loved the character. He did a really good job for me. He read me all my rejection letters, which had very specific information. And then he told me I had the best rejection letters he had ever seen, but he wasn't going to be able to get the book published. And I thought, well, okay, that was a nice little adventure. And I didn't think too much more about it. You know, I didn't know about mystery communities. I didn't think about writing something else. I didn't think about going and taking courses. I just wrote it off as an experience. But in my industry, there was a publisher called Information Today, run by Tom Hogan. And it was the main publication for our online industry. And I didn't realize that he had an imprint that was all about New Jersey. And he had heard I wrote a book. And he said to me, well, what I heard him say was, if you set it in New Jersey, I'll publish it. He later said what he said was, if you set it in New Jersey, I might publish it. But it worked out okay because he did publish it. And he just felt that New Jersey was neglected in mystery writing. I mean, Jane Rubino was working at that point in South Jersey, but there just weren't a lot of people who were writing down at that end of the state, even though there were some more who were writing mysteries up at the top. We're talking back about, first book came out in 1998, so it's a while back. So that's how I ended up in New Jersey. He said, set it in New Jersey. And so after we got started, we figured, well, you can have somebody, the first book was set in Ocean City, and you can have somebody dying every week in Ocean City, you know, if you want to do a series. So we started moving it up and down the coast. And we chose the towns based on my knowledge of them, basically. And I always tell the story about my mother. When I was a baby, we used to go to the shore for the summer. And my mother didn't like it because she said everyone else gets a vacation and I moved my job. So by the time I was 2.5, she was kind of lucky. I got really sick and she used that as an excuse, and she never had to go back to the shore for the summer. So I became was a friend. I don't know if you had this, but when you went on vacation a lot, you could bring a friend. Well, no. I was lucky my parents brought me along. Well, I was lucky. A lot of my friends' parents would say, and some of them had like 4 kids, so they had like 4 friends with them, and they could all bring a playmate. And so I got to go up and down the Jersey coast to all different cities being a friend. So I have different knowledge from different ages from just about all of the cities, at least on the southern half of the Jersey Shore.
Thank you, Jane. You've redeemed yourself there, because I had coming into this evening this romantic notion that you had spent your childhood on the Jersey Shore, and for some reason you had this compelling urge to murder people down there and write books about it. I prefer that story as opposed to thinking this was just a crash commercial decision that, oh, let's move it out of Connecticut to New Jersey to get it published.
Well, if we were going to be crass, we would have used a word processor and just replaced the terms in it. I went down, and each book is really tailored to the town because each town is different.
Yep.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, that is so important in your books because so many authors write books after either a brief superficial visit to a location, or they do a Google search. I have been I'm closely connected with the main crime writers. I met many of them pre-pandemic. I would meet them each year at their writers' conference. And one of the members up there said, you know, what I hate are tourists who come up here for a vacation in Bar Harbor in the summer, and the next thing you know, they're writing a book called Murder in Bar Harbor. Something else I've noticed are people who will take a 2-week junket to Europe, come back and say, okay, I'm now ready to write about a mystery set in Victorian England. Yeah, the research is so important. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I spend a lot of time doing research in the town. I go down, I stay if I can. I'll stay for a month, very often off season, because it's more cost effective. Mm-hmm. And I'll go down and I'll not only revisit the memories I have, but I have to find out what has changed to make a difference. Change the text. I drive, I'm a little maniacal. Like I will drive, the speed limits change in Jersey Shore towns in the winter. So if the book's set off season, I drive and time it and see, little details like that so that if somebody's from there, they'll notice. Meg is always a tourist. She never pretends to know everything about the town. And it's funny, there are some things, I used to know there were 3 kinds of mistakes you can make. And one is, like, I would think I knew what something was called. For my entire life, I called it something, and it turns out technically it has a different name, like maybe a body of water that's subdivided into a lot of different bays. The other one, I can't remember the third one, but the one that killed me is if you call a restaurant and ask them what town they're in, wouldn't you expect them to know? And apparently they don't. They just take a stab at where they think they're located. So, clearly I didn't get the manager in that deal. But, you have to be careful. Oh, and some people will give you their impressions of what's true, and it isn't necessarily, true information. So
I can relate to your restaurant story. Many an evening was lost because I couldn't find the restaurant in the town I was told they were in.
And if you look at a place like Long Beach Island, where there's so many towns, it's like, I just wasn't sure from going to it. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I know. Good luck. Or sometimes I found locations where, despite what the map says, and despite what everybody outside that immediate area says, the locals all refer to it as being in another place.
Oh, okay.
That can drive you crazy when you're in the pre-GPS days. So Meg, excuse me. Sorry, Meg. Jane, have you been able to get to the shore with the pandemic lately, or are you still holed up somewhere in Philly?
I got down during the pandemic, but it was fairly late. And the book I'm writing now is set in Avalon. And luckily, it's in a pretty secluded area of Avalon because I couldn't go and verify the things I would normally verify. I didn't know what was open, what would normally be open, and what would ever be open again. I just didn't know. But I would get some bottles of water and some peanut butter crackers and get in my car and drive down to Avalon, drive around, get out, do what I had to do, come back, never stop to use the restroom. And I would make like about a 6-hour round trip down to Avalon during the pandemic. Since then, I've been down and been out on the beach and done some normal things. I'm going to go again and try and catch up, but not normal.
Are you getting a sense of how the pandemic has affected life out there? Are businesses still in business? I mean, even if they're shuttered, or has there been are they taking a hit that may make it difficult for them?
I don't know what kind of hit some of them have taken. One of my favorite places is in Oyster Creek, which I don't know if you've ever been to. It's up above Atlantic City, and it's kind of like a little fishing village, a little restaurant set back there. And they're only taking cash. And sometimes I wonder if that's trying to make up for what they might have lost. But they're open, and they had a full crowd when we were there. But now with things changing again, I don't know if they'll stay open that way.
Yeah, I've been following the Bar Harbor situation, and this year apparently is very busy. But the problem is up there they can't get sufficient staff in the restaurants, in the hotels, and lines are very long. The people are getting tired. The cruise ships haven't come back, so they're not getting all their custom back. Um, it's it's becoming a difficult experience for everybody up there. And some of the things I'm reading in the media, I think it's pretty common in most resort areas this year that, yeah, crowds are coming back, but service isn't what it used to be. And the businesses are struggling with short staffs and, unfortunately, with the short tempers of some of their guests.
Well, the last time I was in New Jersey, it was the day before they took all the restrictions out. So I was in a restaurant in Avalon. Wasn't very crowded. It was a beautiful day. I think it was after Memorial Day. I can't quite remember the date. But so I haven't been back since everything opened up. That was the day before. And they said, yeah, today you have to put it in to walk through to the restroom. Tomorrow you can come back and walk through.
Well, I've been out to meet with clients in the last couple of weeks for the restaurants. The first time I've done it since the pandemic. And I live in New Jersey, for you folks in the audience who don't know where I'm from. And we didn't need the mask when we were eating, although I typically wear it when I'm not eating or drinking. And the restaurants were very empty. They have outdoor seating, which was nice, but I am worried that we're going to see a hit for many small businesses as we go into the summer and the fall. Which brings me to my next question, Jane. I'm talking to several of the writers who have been visiting us over the pandemic. Do you think the pandemic is going to make a lasting impression on writing? Will we see it in the books? And the reason I ask the question is this. 1918, we had the Great Pandemic. Now, my Irish grandmother, who came to this country during World War I, she would talk about, Dublin City being shelled to pieces by the British, and after the rebellion, and not two bricks being left together. She talked about being sick on the ship across the Atlantic and worried about U-boats sinking it. She told me the stories about arriving in Brooklyn and everything that went with that, meeting the man who became my grandfather. She would talk about the Great Depression. She would talk about a lot of things, but she never mentioned the Great Influenza. And as I look back on it, many of the people who I knew from that time period, nobody ever mentioned it. And if you look at a lot of the literature that came out during that time and after it, very few references to the Great Influenza, which made me wonder, why did people put this out of their minds? Was it the effect of the Great Depression, World War II? Was it just such a horrible event that there's collective amnesia? I consider myself well-read, but I really don't think I really first read about the Great Influenza until maybe I was in high school. What do you think? Would we find the pandemic in your writing? Do you think when we look back in 20, 30 years, we're going to see the pandemic influencing our literature?
I don't know. I don't know the answer. I know right now that the general consensus that I hear is nobody wants to read about it now. Nobody wants it included in books. They want it ignored, I guess because it's still too real. But it would seem to me you can't write off the entire year of 2020 and not in some way write about it and deal with these experiences. But like you, I haven't read anything about the 1918 pandemic that I recall. But I am reading history backwards. And I haven't really gotten past the late 1930s. So I may not have gotten to it yet.
Yeah, there's been, in the last maybe 10, 15 years, there have been several books. There's one called The Great Influenza. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, that goes into an in-depth study. As a matter of fact, when I first learned about the Great Influenza epidemic, they were still calling it the Spanish flu because of the World War I censorship and all that. And that's only maybe been in the last 10, 15 years, I think, that the history books are restating it. So now I also contrast this. I think you and most of our fans know my wife's Japanese. from Japan. And in her spare time, she likes to look at Japanese soap operas, Korean soap operas, which are all the rage. And I'm noticing that they have incorporated in the storylines the pandemic. You see people with masks. She says that they talk about social distancing and all the problems of quarantines and things like that. And I don't look at a lot of American television, but it seems like we've kind of ignored it. And maybe to your point, it's still too painful for us. We don't want to build it into the storylines. But it just seems that we have a collective wish to wash this out of our minds.
Well, it's so controversial in ways that it probably shouldn't be. It isn't like necessarily a shared reaction. I don't know if that has something to do with it. But I did watch Law and Order, which is about the only thing I've watched on American television. And they had masks on. It seemed inconsistent. And they had plastic, box up in the courtroom. But I didn't watch enough to really get a feel for how they were treating it. But they acknowledged it at least.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So this way, in 50 years, when people look at the TV shows, they're going to go, why are those people wearing masks? Sorry, bad joke.
No, at least they'll remember it, because I, like you, the only reason I know about the 1918 influenza is because I believe it was one of my father's uncle's girlfriend died of it. And it sort of ruined him. And so that was kind of the family lore, that he had wandered away after that happened. He was devastated. Otherwise, I never heard about it.
Yeah, and even my parents who grew up, as children, after it, and you would think that, first impressions would be around. Like there were things that I learned when I was a small child from my parents that occurred in their lifetimes that I can talk about because mother or dad said this, but nobody ever talked about the flu. They talked about Uncle Johnny having appendicitis, things like that. But so yeah, I think this will be interesting to see how this begins to transpire. Jane, you and I are both on the board for the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America, and we've been working together on live stream events, trying to support writers in the New York City area during this. But can you share with us from your perspective how you're seeing writers individually being affected by the pandemic?
Well, I can think of one good thing, only one good thing that could affect writers, and that is one of the things we had talked about, are there any full-time writers anymore? And if people can work at home, they can free up a lot of time and do a lot more writing. So in that way, the changes that the pandemic wrought, if they stick, in terms of home offices, will mean there will be a lot more time available for writing. It's been quite an adjustment getting used to Zoom and doing everything on Zoom, as you know, because you have to coordinate it.
And you and I have done a lot together.
Right? And it's funny, I've spent my life, a lot of my life training, speaking in front of groups. And I began to become phobic about getting on Zoom anymore. It's like I don't know if I'll have a fear of going out in public when I go out in public again, which I'll find out in August. But I've begun to get it isn't even that I'm tired of Zoom. I'm tired of looking at myself on Zoom. I think it inhibits me.
Well, as the guy who's sitting across from you in Zoom in all these meetings and looking at you, don't worry, you look fine.
Well, I don't look, so I don't know. Recently, I realized I had done a whole Zoom interview, and I really had never actually glanced at myself to see. It's a strange thing.
Oh, it is. It takes a lot of getting used to. I mean, I probably spend 20, 30 hours a week in front of Zoom. So, yeah, it just, after a while, it becomes some second nature to you. You just, go about your business. So you've touched on 2 points here, Jane, that I'd like to go through with you. And the first one is, what do you think is going to happen in the mystery publishing industry because of the pandemic? Now, you mentioned writers since they're working from home already, will have more time for writing. We talked about whether or not we may see the pandemic in future books. But the relationship with writers and publishers and agents, critics, do you see anything happening there, or again, is it too soon to tell?
Well, I have heard, and this is only hearsay, that a lot of agents have given up the ghost, but I don't know that from firsthand experience. I think a lot of people in different fields have changed because of the pandemic. Um, the one thing, and I don't know if it's really related to the pandemic, I think the big thing that's happening is just that so many more people are writing and so many more people are going into independent publishing. And yes, it's still wonderful to get a deal with any I'm with a small publisher and I love him. But to get one with the big three or four, whatever the current count is, just becoming more and more difficult. Can't even begin to guess what effect the pandemic would have on that. I just don't know.
What I'm noticing, and I've been working with writers now for about 4 or 5 years helping them develop their social media. And I'm getting the sense that if you started writing just before Amazon got a hold, the internet came along, and e-readers, and you're able to establish yourself, you probably did all right, and you're still doing all right. You know, I look at people like James Patterson, Tess Gerritsen, the writers who started writing at about that time, and it's more difficult for them, one, to get an agent, get published. Two, even if they do manage to get published, it's very difficult to build up the audience. And while publishers never really did a lot to promote most authors, unless you were a megastar, it seems that they're doing a heck of a lot less now. And, you know, that's why when I talk with clients, I try to encourage them to get out there, build their following, because that's what publishers and agents want to see. If they'll even consider you. You know, how many books do they think they can sell when you get started? So
it's very difficult. Yeah.
It's you know, the big firms seem to be focused on the megastars, but you know, they're kind of like, excuse the celestial reference, but they're kind of like these superstars that kind of like burn out after a while. I mean, James Patterson is not going to live forever. And yeah, I know Tom Clancy is theoretically still writing, but it's not the same, and that I can't last for very long. So you're not going to see new megastars coming along. Like, look at J.K. Rowling. I think, okay, she's not mystery thriller, but, you know, she started maybe 5-10 years just before, you know, Amazon and everything got started. Scholastic Books published her, and she took off. But I think that if she came on the scene today, she would be nowhere near as successful as she is, and she'd probably be a barista in that coffee shop she used to write in.
Well, it's hard to say because I think the fickle finger of fate can, you know, touch certain people, but I don't think it's as likely as it was. Though oddly enough, it can happen within indie published books too. There's a woman named Marie Force who publishes romances, which I know very little about, and she's just huge, absolutely huge. But how she did it, I can't tell you what happened, but she did it mostly independently of publishers.
You're right. There are some independent publishers. I've met several myself who, yeah, if I mention their names, you'd go who, but they seem to make a decent little living out of it. You know, they've mastered the art of one, good writing, put it together in a book properly, you know, the cover, the editing, and things like that, you know, the mechanics of getting an ISBN, getting it into the system, and they build up an audience, and they're making a good living. I mean, they're not wealthy, but it's keeping the wolves from the door. I don't know what the future holds, though, going forward, because you're right. More and more people are writing, and there's a lot of trash out there. You know, I subscribe to BookPub. I get their daily updates on my iPhone, and you know, there's a lot of, you know, authors publishing books. They look interesting. They look like a fun read. There's other ones. I picked up a few of the ones, you know, the ones that are for free or for 99 cents, and I'm like, gee, why bother? And then the other problem we have, and I'd like your opinion here, please. Newspapers are shutting down. Magazines are shutting down. We don't have the literary critics that we do. The New York Times just dumped their long-standing mystery reviewer. Somebody else has come along. I'll make you bet she's making a lot less money than her predecessor. But these were the people who, first you had the agents and the publishers who were the filters. You know, the really bad stuff never got anywhere. And then you had the literary critics who would say, yeah, this is good, this is not so good, this is comparable to, and people would follow them. But they're going away. So I know there are book bloggers out there. You know, Christopher Zagorski, Drew and Love are two that come to mind right off the bat, who are stepping into that void. And I think, you know, in time we may see that they will build followings and they could become very influential in the industry. But right now, you know, if your bookstores aren't around anymore, and even the ones that are left, even the, you know, Barnes and Noble, you know, the last man standing. I can remember 20 years ago, you would go into their bookstore on Tuesday, stacks of books all over the place. You know, for all sorts of mystery thriller authors, romance, historical novels. Nowadays, you go in on a Tuesday, even pre-pandemic, not as many books around. It's getting harder to promote yourself. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's definitely harder to distinguish yourself among all the people who are writing. And social media, as you said, is one way to do it. When I wrote my first books for Plexus, it just seemed so easy. I would get reviews. Newspapers would call. If somebody come out to my house, they take my picture, they publish an article about it. I get calls to appear on the radio. And that just doesn't happen anymore. And I think to your point, those folks aren't necessarily there, which is not, I didn't really think about it. I thought they weren't coming to me, but the whole system has sort of changed. So it rarely happens. I remember the Chestnut Hill Local went and found Lisa Reagan, but that's the only local newspaper I've seen in a long time that found a local author and promoted it. It just doesn't seem to happen that much.
Yeah, I wonder what the future is going to look like. You know, I think, you know, as we, you know, if you look at history, we go through these phases of, let's call it creative destruction, we'll be charitable. Something new comes along. So I think people will step into the void. I'm not sure when or how, which leads me to my next question, you know, is the full-time writer going to be a thing of the past? Will it become the next dodo bird? You know, I have to admit that, you know, many of the writers I've met, mystery thriller writers I've met, most of them have day jobs, and they write in the evenings or on the weekends. Will we ever see the full-time writer come back again?
Well, I think there's a couple things that are contributing to that, and one of them does come out of the pandemic, and this kind of has an impact on me. I've always been a great go away and write person. I've always, you know, wanted to take a month, go to an island, go somewhere and focus on writing. Not at home, but go somewhere. But now everything's so expensive, that opportunity is gone. In A Drinking Life, Pete Hamill wrote a sentence about how he had gone and lived in genteel poverty to write. I don't think you can live in genteel poverty now. Certainly not after the price increases in rents and purchasing houses after the pandemic. So I think that's going to have to settle to see what our expenses are after all this is over.
No, it's very true. You know, I know some media channels were saying for a while there that we were going to see rents crater, but yeah, you know, being a lifelong New Yorker before I moved over to New Jersey, I mean, yeah, rents occasionally retreat for a while, but they come roaring back. So I can't imagine anybody being a starving writer in Manhattan anymore unless they're homeless. It's just a factor of life that it's getting harder and harder to live in genteel poverty. You know, Pete Hamill's comment made me think of George Orwell, one of my favorite writers, down and out in Paris and London, and his life on the streets of Paris and London and how he got by, and that world is long gone now. It's
Right.
very difficult to survive. I can remember this is about a little over 40 years ago, right after I got out of university. I was in Manhattan, standing on a bus corner one evening waiting for my bus to go home. And a panhandler walked up. He was an older guy, and you know, it was he wasn't the classic homeless person we have these days who really, sadly, looks pretty bad. But he just, stopped and he said, "Hey, buddy, do you have some spare change, please?" And I put my hand in my pocket, took out some change, and I gave it to him. And looked at me and he said, it's just so much harder to make a living these days. In the old days, you could stop at a kitchen, at a restaurant, they let you wash dishes, they'd feed you, they'd give you a little money, and you go on your way. That's all gone now. And, I've thought about that many times since that evening, that the opportunities for the working poor are just not there anymore. You can't, paying people off the books, God forbid, you get caught by that. I mean, the IRS falls on you like a ton of bricks. Meanwhile, you've got white collar criminals walking away with billions at the other end. But don't let me get started there. The world is changing, and I think that the full-time writer, as we know it, is going to go away. And I'll stick my neck out tonight and say I think even the megastar writer will go away too, because they're never going to get the chance to build that following like their predecessors could. There never will be another Tom Clancy again. Now, notwithstanding that, you've got these aberrations from time to time. The woman who wrote 50 Shades of Grey, that was independently published. I think she wrote it more as a lark than anything else. Bestseller, made a movie, wrote 2 sequels, and she's very happy. Now, of course, there's been a lot of imitators, and none of them have been nearly as successful. But every once in a while, you get one of these ones that comes out of the woodwork. But I don't think we're going to remember the author of 50 Shades of Grey 10 years from now. She made her money; she's happy, so I don't feel bad for her. But I think it's going to be very difficult for writers going forward.
I can't argue with you. I think it is going to be hard, and it's going to be hard for young writers trying to come up. As you said, to try and go to a city and live there and participate in the life that was the life that young writers had. I mean, when the pandemic was full blown, I kept thinking, well, the Roaring '20s came after the earlier, the Spanish flu. Maybe things will go that way again, but I can't afford to go to Paris and hang out for a year and do nothing. It's like it's not the same. Just it isn't going to work out.
You're right, and a number of years ago, I was reading biographies of Hemingway, Steinbeck, and it was a different world back then. You had many more publishers as opposed to the big 3 or 4 that we have today. You had a lot more agents. You could make a living as a writer. Yeah, maybe you wouldn't be pulling in the big bucks, but you could have a small apartment in Manhattan. You could go to the local saloon, hang out with your friends. If you made it over to Paris and you spoke enough French, in the 20s, Paris was a great place to be. The dollar was worth a lot. But today, those days are gone. And I haven't been to Paris in a number of years, but what I know from what I've read and people who have been there, Paris has changed. I consider myself fortunate that I saw Paris before it was Americanized. I can remember the Champs-Élysées before McDonald's opened there. What I understand now is you see a lot of either American or American-like businesses that are set up. More cafes are being squeezed out, just like the pubs over in England. And that life that people led during the 20s just can't be there. And I don't see anything that's the equivalent. It's not like, well, okay, instead of being in Manhattan, everyone went over to Brooklyn. No, that's not going on. It's not like, instead of being in Paris, they all decided to go to Tours or someplace else. That's not happened. And also, I think maybe it has to do with the technology. You and I are about the same age. You probably remember growing up, mobs of children in the street playing from dawn to dusk, especially during the summers. But today you look out in the streets, okay, families are a lot smaller, but children stay indoors. We have air conditioning, we have the internet, they have video games. Parents arrange play dates. No longer do they just go out, knock on the door, can Jimmy or Mary come out to play? It's a very different world, and I wonder what kind of writers will that produce in the future. I mean, when you think of people like Orwell, Hemingway, Steinbeck, they wrote from their experiences. They wrote from the lives they lived. I think of Homage to Catalonia from Orwell. you know, you're not going to find a work like that written today, or again, I'll stick my neck out. I don't think we'll see it for another 100 years.
Well, I think we as an age group romanticize what went ahead of us. I don't know what the youth of today would romanticize. I have no idea because I'm not young. And it's such a different world, as you said, because of the technology. So I have no idea what would be their ideal for, living that life, what that life would be. If it's lived in their house online, I have no idea. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's a little bit frightening. So Jane, what have you been reading during the pandemic? I know you've been locked down for most of it. Anything new or different?
Well, as I keep saying, I haven't been reading enough. I've been doing the route which a lot of people do, and that is streaming a lot more than I should have. I've been writing a lot, so that's good. And then when I take off, I have time. It's not good, but I tend to stream. And I know that Stephen King, right, I believe says, if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write. And so I am trying to do a little bit more. I like to read nonfiction, so I read a lot of history. And as I said, I'm reading it backwards. I try to read books that my friends bring out. So, I mean, that takes a lot of time, and I try to get through them. Of the ones that I read that I really loved, I read November Road. I don't know if did you read that?
No, I haven't
By Lou Berney. That's great. That was a book that stands out in my memory. And also, I'm trying to read more that comes, not off the mystery list. So I read The Nightingale. There's so many World War II books out there, and I know I read others, but that's the one that really, stands out in my mind. I was thinking I wrote a book that is a romantic book, but it's not a romance. So I read a whole lot of romances to see if I thought I could write a romance, and the answer is no. I found that out. But I did read a bunch to see about that. I'd also written a book, which is complete, which I thought might be a young adult book, and I read a lot of young adult books, and there was a lot of crossover to World War II there, to get an ear for the way young adult books were written. So a lot of the reading I was doing was really working, and it wasn't for pleasure. I tried to read a lot of humor books. When I finished the Avalon book, the first draft, I felt it was really flat. And I felt it was flat because I had written it during the pandemic when I was sitting at home, not doing too much of anything. So I went out and I got, I'm reading Martin Short now. I read Colin Jost. I don't know if you know him from Saturday Night Live.
No,
And it's he had a chapter in his book that said, my grandmother won't like this chapter and she shouldn't read it, and I shouldn't have read it either. I didn't like it either. But still, I wanted to keep up on what's going on in humor. And then I have classics I love, like Calvin Trillin and Bill Bryson. So those I can pick up, read in part, not even a whole book at one point. So actually, when I feel like I haven't been reading, I have been. I've been going back. I've been reading some classics. I don't think I'm ever going to get through Brave New World. I don't know why. I start it and I never finish it. I do 1984. I do Animal Farm, but I never quite get through Brave New World. I tried that.
Yeah, so, I haven't done that one either. I've done, 1984, Animal Farm, but that was never on my assigned reading list in school, so I missed it. I probably should try it myself.
I have a bunch of copies of it. If I ever get my stuff out of storage, I'm sure I could spare one because I'm always buying it and then never quite reading it.
If I ever see you again, hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later.
I hope sooner, yes.
Hey, let's talk about the bête noire of the publishing writing world right now, Amazon. Do you think they've been helpful during the pandemic for writers? I know that, I think my wife and I are alive because of Amazon, because we use their services for food delivery and everything else. I think I'm now a forwarding center somewhere in their corporate mailing list. But impressions of Amazon during this time. And then please don't be influenced by Jeff taking off on a rocket ship tomorrow morning either.
No, I buy nothing from Amazon except books. I believe I bought one thing once that I had to do that I couldn't find anywhere else. I tend not to buy from Amazon. But I have written, as you know, I've written 5 books now for the one publisher. And then I have done some that I've published independently. And those I've done through Amazon. So I'm always getting packages from Amazon in regard to that. And I will buy books through Amazon. You know, I kind of hate the monopolistic side of Amazon, but I know a lot of people find it really convenient. And I'm not being really that righteous when I don't buy anything from them, because I really don't buy much of anything. I mean, that's sort of there's nothing I need so badly that I need to get from Amazon. But it's opening up this whole the independent publishing world. I found out from I just put the books up as sort of fillers between my other books. And I found out there's this huge world out there, and it's so complex, and people are running home businesses where they're distributing these books, not just through Amazon, not just as ebooks, but they're putting them up on all sorts of platforms, and it's far more complex than I can possibly understand. So I don't think Amazon has much of a stranglehold on writers like they did. But they're still the main game in town when people go for traditionally published books.
I know. They've got the platform set up. They've got reasonable customer service most of the time, and they sure make it easy for you to buy things. So yeah, I think they're going to be with us for a long time, and the pandemic, in my opinion, has only cemented their position in our lives.
Oh, yeah, because I think people who never used them before started using them heavily.
Yeah. And in our case, we started using services that we never thought we would use. I mean, when I heard that people would order their groceries through Amazon, I would just scoff at that. Can't you go out and buy your own food? And then the pandemic hit, so yeah, it came in handy. Hey,
I have to tell you,
go ahead.
Story about my mother. My mother never went to the grocery store, so I grew up always having the groceries just appear in the kitchen miraculously. A really wonderful thing. She said it had to do with World War II. She said she started doing it during the war. And I mean, I wasn't born for many years after the war, and it was still going on in 1970. She was still getting them delivered. So I don't find that extravagant at all. She spent far less money than she did if we ever let her loose in a grocery store. So that's a good thing.
Yep,
but I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. I wanted to switch gears for a second and just talk about your main character, Meg. We got her sitting off there to your right on the stage. Who is the inspiration for Meg? Is she based on anyone, yourself, a friend, or would you rather not say?
Well, people tell me she's a lot like me, but she's a lot more audacious than I am. She's a lot more outgoing than I am. One time I had to go on a panel. I may have told you this story with Brad Parks, who's a very good singer, and he had at Deadly Ink had sung the night before, and I had to go on a panel with him as Meg, and her point was she sang to him, and she said Jane would never do this, but I would, and then she sang to him, and that's the difference. She goes out there, she asks questions. I could never do what she does. I could never go out and pry into people's lives and find out what's going on. So she's some sort of inner part of me, but nothing external, I'll tell you.
Okay. Can we talk about your next projects? You said you're writing a book based in Avalon. Do you have a title yet, or?
The last few books have all been postcard titles, like Missing You in Atlantic City, Greetings from Ventnor City. I don't really have one from Avalon. I have a title which is called Strangers in the Dunes, which really makes sense, but it doesn't fit the pattern. But I don't know what my publisher, what Plexus will think about it. I had a lot of trouble starting this book. Again, it was into the pandemic, and I had an experience from my past life that I thought I should incorporate in a book. And it just got far too dark for Meg. So I had to pull the book apart and kind of take part of it and bring it over into the Meg book. So it was kind of difficult to get started on it. But I knew the premise I wanted. And I like to have something historical, social history in the background of every book now. So in the Atlantic City book, it has the backdrop of the Democratic National Convention. It's not about that, but that's in the background. The Ventnor City book has the 1968 Miss America pageant. I didn't have a particular event like that, but I wanted to write about kind of the sexual revolution and the 1970s and disco and basically Calvin Trillin, who's one of my favorites, I mentioned him before, wrote a book called Remembering Danny. It was a lot of years ago now. And it was about the men who graduated from college right before the sexual revolution. So my character graduates from college in 1965. And so feeling he's missed out on everything that happened after that, he disappears in 1977. So I knew that was the premise I had. So I had to pull together, everything she would have to do to go look for a man who disappeared in 1977 and find out if did he really disappear? Was he murdered? Did he get away? So that's basically what's going on in that book. And the tie-in is that she is house sitting with Andy at the house where the fella disappeared from, where this man disappeared from in 1977. And his daughter, who's slipping into dementia, comes back looking for him. And that's how she gets into the task of going and looking for him. But the first draft is finished, and I'm just going back through it. As I said, I just thought, having been written in the pandemic, it was somewhat flat, and it didn't have as much as the detail that I like to have in. So then I made a trip and realized I put far too much detail about the flora and fauna. So now I'm taking that out. But it's getting there. It's due on Labor Day, so it should be finished by then.
Good. And publishing date later this year, early next year?
Early next year, next spring is the estimate.
Good. Well, we'll certainly have to have you back then to talk about it when it comes out.
I hope so. I hope it comes out then. I hope it... every day I'm getting a little bit fonder of it. So it's like, it's getting better. I don't know if other people go through that. I've never had as much trouble with one as I did with this one.
Every writer seems to always have one book that, gave them conniptions, that, they really had to either dig deep into themselves or, take the book apart, rewrite it and start all over again.
Well, I think starting with something that was just far too dark for Meg was that, got me off track for a while. So I pulled that out, and hopefully that'll go to another character at some point, because that was a strange experience for my life that I'd like to write about, but not for Meg.
Good.
We take better care of her of that. No matter what she thinks, we take better care of her than putting her in that kind of danger. We just like to inconvenience her.
That's good. Please don't murder your main character. I hate to have that to
no
to happen. That's one of my complaints about British mysteries is too often we'll have a wonderful series and they decide to kill somebody off, and I hate that. That's just my personal beef. What about other future projects, Jane? Are you going to keep wandering up and down the Jersey Shore? I mean, sooner or later you're going to run out of towns. Are you going to return to any of the earlier towns, or any plans for Meg long term?
Well, I've never been to Wildwood. Meg has not been to Wildwood, and Meg has not been to Sea Isle City. So there are a couple cities for her left for her to go to. I have a couple of books that I wrote outside of the Meg series that I have to figure out what to do with. One is the one that's romantic, but not a romance, and the other one is the one that's about the homeland in during World War II. That I thought was a young adult book, but may not be. So I want to pay some attention. But there'll always be, I have an ongoing contract with Plexus. We agree that, the handshake contract, but we agree that there'll be books going on for Meg.
Good. Now, did you have like a story arc for Meg? Like at some point, does she retire, get married, or do you leave her, will your final book just leave her alone at the beach somewhere, draining a bottle of Jack Daniels?
Well, I don't have an end game in sight, but I do. She has gotten to the point she's engaged now.
Oh, good.
And I think she's going to have to get married, and I am very reluctant to get her married because everything's fine just the way it is. And that, as far as I can see, is how she feels, that everything is fine the way she is. But she has these two friends in Cape May, George and Claude, who run a B&B. And George is going to force the issue of having a wedding, I'm pretty sure. But I'm finding that hard. I don't really want to see her change. I like the way things are now, but people do have to grow a little.
Yeah, well, you can always leave her the way she is. Let her break up with Andy. You're still going over there right now.
I don't think I can do that. I only have one fan who doesn't like Andy. I don't think I can get rid of him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we get rid of Meg and keep Andy. That would be a real story change.
That would be.
I'm waiting for a reaction from Meg over there, but she seems to be ignoring me. I can't say I blame her.
She doesn't believe it. She doesn't think it'll happen. She'd probably be relieved if I didn't make her go out on all these adventures she goes out on. As I said, I make her uncomfortable sometimes.
Well, maybe if you switch genres from mystery to like something like women's literature, where she just goes out to the beach on the summer, meets her friends, has an existential crisis, and then just gets ready for the next season. No?
I could try that. I don't know how she did. Well, yeah, I was going to say she doesn't seem that deep, but she is, and that's one thing. She's been getting deeper. I mean, she really cares about the people who have suffered because of a murder or a disappearance. She really feels for them. So she's gotten much deeper over the course of I would say the second half of the series. She's very different. She's very concerned about them. So she could have a crisis.
Good. I'm glad that there's depth to her, and she's got a future ahead of her. That's good for Meg, right, Meg? So.
No reaction.
Yeah, I know. She's just shy. Do you have any predictions for what life is going to be like for writers such as yourself as we come out of the pandemic?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think everybody's so anxious to get back to seeing each other and to get back on the road and to meet people again. I mean, early on in this conversation, we were sort of talking about trying to find your audience and trying to find kind of the people who will and like your books. And you can do it online, and a lot of people are successfully doing it online. But there's nothing like getting out and talking to people and meeting people and getting to spend time with people. So I think that's going to be writers' main concern, is going out and reestablishing those relationships.
That is a common problem. I'm meeting a lot of people in business, nonprofit groups, religious groups, and everybody's concerned about will the audiences, the congregations, the fans come back. And from what I'm hearing, it doesn't sound like they're really, jumping up and down to rush back into wherever they were before pre-pandemic.
Not yet. No, not yet. I don't know when I'll go to a movie. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
when I lived in New York, I would go 5 times a week, and now I don't know when I'll go.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I really have no desire to rush into a movie theater now, especially since, virtually any film that's released, you can probably see on TV within 1 or 2 days after it's released in the theaters. Of course, you've got to pay an exorbitant price, but that's something else.
But you can crowd more people into the room at least.
Yeah,
people from your own household, not strangers. People from your old house.
Yeah, you can charge them as they come in, and the popcorn is free. But no, you're right. A couple of times I've been out, I've wandered through stores, and there really are no crowds there. And I think that if we don't get, if there isn't a good Christmas season for many shops this year, I think we're going to see a lot of them close their doors. I'm sorry.
No, department stores I worry about a lot. They were having trouble before.
Yeah, Lord & Taylor's is gone now. I was at a mall here in New Jersey earlier in the week to meet a client at a restaurant. There's a 4-story Lord & Taylor's that's shut up. The Starbucks that was in the mall closed a couple of weeks ago. At a certain, there's going to be a tipping point where these malls are just not going to have enough people paying rent. They're going to have to shut down. It'll be cheaper to shut down than to stay open. So I think, we could see that coming in 2022, 2023 as as this pandemic hopefully begins to unwind. Well, Jane, we're coming up to the end of the hour. I'd just like to thank you for coming on. This has been very enjoyable, very informative. I know I learned a lot about you and what's going on in the world out there. Appreciate you bringing along your sidekick, Meg, over there.
And she didn't cause any trouble.
I know. Given who she is, I'm really surprised for a number of reasons. When your next book comes out, we're going to have to get you back here next year to talk about it and help in the promotion.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, you're always welcome here, and you always feel free to drop in any Monday we're having the show and sit in the audience if you want to. And by the way, we invite you to the Christmas party at the end of the year.
Oh, okay. That sounds good.
Okay, so I'm just going to say to my audience, thank you for staying here with us tonight and listening to Jane. It was a great discussion that we had. We're ending the live broadcast now. I welcome you back next month. Our guest next month is a cozy mystery writer, Kelly McClymer, based out of Maine. I think you'll enjoy her. She writes some great stories, and she's a wonderful character. Please contact me at conpsweeney@submit.com.